Let's be real. Back on Namek, Frieza was a monster. A being so far beyond anything the Z-Fighters had ever faced that even sensing his power was terrifying. But what happens if we take the Earth's strongest fighters, Krillin, Tien, and Yamcha, and pit them against Frieza in his prime Namek Saga form? Now before you laugh, remember that these guys didn't stop training after Namek. By the time of the Android Saga and beyond, they had massive power-ups training alongside Saiyans who were casually busting planets. So the question is, could the humans that once cowered in front of Frieza actually beat him now? If you enjoy conversations like this and want to take part in deeper Dragon Ball discussions, I highly encourage you to join the Dragon Ball HQ Discord server. Links below in the description. We'll be diving into this topic and more over there. Now, without further delay, let's begin. Throughout the Namek Saga, Krillin's power undergoes one of the most impressive and underrated growth arcs in Dragon Ball Z. His strength evolves rapidly, not just from his potential being unlocked by Guru, but also through a steady progression of battle, experience, and adaptation, almost mirroring the Saiyan trait of growing stronger after each intense encounter. By the time Krillin faces the Ginyu Force, his strength had already skyrocketed. With a recorded power level of 13,000, he's already surpassed the threshold of a planet buster, as El Maga Legendario notes that the power level of 10,000 is enough to destroy a planet. That alone puts Krillin in elite company, but he doesn't stop there. As the Namek battles intensify, Krillin's power once again multiplies, this time by nearly sevenfold, reaching roughly 75,000 by the time he and others confront Frieza. At this point, he completely eclipses every member of the Ginyu Force aside from Ginyu himself. If we apply that same destructive potential scaling, this would theoretically place Namek-era Krillin's output at dwarf star level strength. An absurd leap for a character who just arcs earlier struggled against Nappa's attacks. Unfortunately, after Namek, power levels are no longer provided, and Krillin gradually fades from the main combat lineup. By the Android and Cell sagas, he's clearly outclassed. Against Perfect Cell, Krillin's attacks are meaningless, and even against the androids, he plays more of a support role than direct combat. The manga version of the Buu Saga continues this trend, and Goku outright tells Krillin to stay back since the threats are far beyond his level, and he's eventually turned to stone by Dabura, ending his participation in the arc. However, the anime continuity paints a slightly different picture, giving Krillin and the other humans a significant power buff. For example, Yamcha is shown taking on and defeating both Olibu and Gorilla simultaneously. Impressive, considering Olibu is capable of fighting evenly with base Pikkon, who himself could one-shot Super Perfect Cell. This matters because by the time of Dragon Ball Super, Krillin has grown exponentially stronger and is consistently referred to as the strongest Earthling. This claim is further supported by his inclusion in the Tournament of Power, chosen over Yamcha and other potential candidates. Based on this scaling, this version of Krillin easily surpasses Super Perfect Cell, putting his strength comfortably within the solar system busting range at bare minimum. It's even more impressive when you consider his brief encounters with Cell Max. When Krillin is clearly outmatched, the fact that he isn't obliterated suggests his power is at least fractionally comparable to Cell Max's. Even a tiny fraction of that strength will place him in the universal tier range, or at the very least, close enough to be considered within the same general spectrum. Naturally, this level of power would extend to his speed as well. Krillin by this point would scale to being massively faster than light, supported by countless feats, calculations, and scaling chains that place modern Dragon Ball characters at astronomical levels of power and speed. So in short, while Krillin's relevance as a frontline fighter faded in Namek, his long-term growth, especially in Super, suggests that Earth's bravest human evolved far beyond his early limitations, ultimately standing above the universe's most capable mortal. Tien remains the strongest human on Earth entering the Saiyan Saga, a title he continues to hold throughout the early stages of Dragon Ball Z. After training intensely to prepare for the arrival of Vegeta and Nappa, Tien's power level skyrockets to around 1800. Making him the strongest Earthling behind Piccolo and arguably behind Gohan when the boy's emotions surge. Despite this growth, however, Tien finds himself outmatched by Nappa, who possesses roughly twice his power. Even the signature Tri-Beam technique proves ineffective against the Saiyan warrior. However, this shouldn't be seen as a failure on Tien's part, and even Goku with a power level of 8,000 acknowledged Nappa's extraordinary toughness. In the following arc, Tien spends his time training on King Kai's planet. Within the anime continuity, this training pays off tremendously, as Tien's power increases over 20-fold. He's even shown fighting members of the Ginyu Force who have power levels between 40 and 50,000. It's worth noting that the anime operates as its own canon, with events approved by Toriyama, meaning these feats are valid within that version of the story. At this point, Tien's power would easily reach large planetary levels, even possibly dwarf star tier. However, once resurrected, the difference between him and the later threats like Frieza and the androids becomes much clearer. He far outclasses them. That said, Tien's Neo Tri-Beam exists in a league all of its own. Fans will recall that he was even able to damage and hold down Semi-Perfect Cell, an accomplishment beyond what most characters could achieve at that stage, bearing Super Vegeta. In the Buu Saga, Tien returns briefly to intercept a blast from Buu tanks aimed at Hercule and Dende. Though the act is brave, he immediately admits he's outmatched, and overall scaling doesn't change from this encounter. He has no meaningful comparison to Dabura or any major Buu level threat. However, when moving into Dragon Ball Super, Tien's relevance fluctuates. During the build-up to the Tournament of Power, he's portrayed as one of the weaker members of Universe 7's team, struggling to keep pace with base Goku during training sessions alongside Gohan. However, as is common in Super, power scaling becomes inconsistent. By episode 106, Tien displays a massive leap in strength. During a battle against a sniper sniper from another universe whose attacks are strong enough to blow off both Piccolo's arms and threaten Ultimate Gohan, Goku, and Vegeta, Tien uses his multiform technique, dividing his power into 4 bodies. Even with this power split, however, he endures direct hits without visible damage and ultimately overpowers the sniper using the Tri-Beam. Though this may seem unbelievable compared to his earlier showings, it's hardly the first time Super has ever portrayed sudden power jumps. Based on this, at minimum, Tien appears comparable to base Saiyans, when including his Tri-Beam. Therefore, even a restrained or weakened Tien surviving such power is remarkable. At the very least, his Tri-Beam manages universal levels of destructive potential, while the high-end interpretation places him well into the multiversal range. Consequently, his speed would also scale to an extreme easily within the massively faster than light category, especially since characters far weaker than him have demonstrated the ability to cross universal distances with incredibly short time frames. By the time of the Saiyan saga, while Yamcha is weaker than both Tien and Krillin, he still holds a respectable power level of 14,000, placing him roughly on par with Raditz. When the Saiyans finally arrive on Earth, Yamcha faces off against one of the Cybermen, and contrary to popular belief, he actually wins the battle with ease. His death only occurs after the Cyberman self-destructs, completely catching him off guard. In fact, the series explicitly points out that even Krillin would have died in the same situation, emphasizing that Yamcha's loss wasn't due to lack of strength but sheer misfortune. In the manga, Yamcha sits out the Namek saga entirely and he remains dead at the time. However, in the anime continuity, things unfold pretty differently. Yamcha, alongside the other fallen Z fighters, trains on King Kai's planet, eventually battling the Ginyu Force and even managing to defeat Raccoon himself. Considering that stronger Ginyu Force members, including Guldo, have power levels ranging from 40,000 to 50,000, Yamcha's growth during this period is immense, about 33 times stronger than his Saiyan saga self. At this stage, Yamcha easily reaches multiplanetary to dwarf star levels of power, as far weakened characters have already demonstrated planet-busting capabilities or caused dwarf star level explosions. By the Android saga, he would logically be several times stronger, still roughly 4 to 5 times this level. Although Yamcha's appearance during the Android and Cell saga are limited, mainly his encounters with Android 20 and his brief struggle with the Cell Juniors, there's actually more to unpack regarding his strength than most fans realize. When Androids 19 and 20 first attack Yamcha, they completely mistake his energy signature for base Goku's, implying his key output matched the data Gero had recorded for Goku's projected strength. Gero's estimates were based on Goku's growth after Namek, and he knew about Frieza and King Cold but not Super Saiyan, meaning his expectations for Goku's base power were already astronomical. If we interpret this correctly, Gero may have believed base Trunks was strong enough to defeat Mega Frieza, unaware that Trunks' victory came from being a Super Saiyan. This means that by extension, Yamcha's energy being mistaken for Goku's would place him above Mega Frieza's level, a being with a power level of at least 150 million, making Yamcha star level or possibly solar system level in the anime continuity, depending on how you interpret Frieza's surviving Namek explosion. This scaling, however, depends on whether Gero's data truly reflected Frieza's power or just his genetic potential. Regardless, this theoretical scaling is overshadowed by what happens later in the Buu saga. By this time, Yamcha has stopped training seriously, but upon being sent to the other world, he experiences another dramatic increase in strength. There he manages to defeat both Olibu and Gorilla simultaneously, performing an even better feat against them than Pikkon did. This is the same Pikkon who effortlessly one-shotted Super Perfect Cell. In other words, by the end of the Buu saga, Yamcha had become powerful enough to solo the Cell games, reaching solar system level or beyond in terms of destructive capability. As for speed, he scales completely to base Goku after the Cell games and base Pikkon, both of whom are shown traveling across universe-sized distances within the other world in brief moments, putting Yamcha's speed at quadrillions of times faster than light at the very least. Now, when viewed through the lens of Dragon Ball's evolving power scale, factoring in both the Z and Super continuities, it becomes clear that the Earthling strength has been dramatically underestimated. Krillin, Tien, and Yamcha each began as martial artists bound by human limits, but by their relentless training, exposure to divine ki, and consistent participation in universe-threatening conflicts gradually elevated them to a level that defies their origin. By the end of Dragon Ball Z and well into Super, these three are no longer weak side characters, but rather warriors whose power far eclipses anything Frieza could have imagined during the Namek era. Their feats, statements, and contextual scaling place them comfortably above the solar system tier, and by association with the god-level fighters they battle alongside against, even brushing into lower echelons of universal potency. This isn't a mere exaggeration either. It's the logical result of exponential power growth that defines Dragon Ball as a whole. If Goku and Vegeta's base forms can reach divine levels through training and exposure to God Ki, then the humans who have sparred, adapted, and survived alongside them for decades must scale correspondingly. Krillin's combat parody moments with Super Saiyan Blue Goku, Tien's ability to restrain opponents who threaten Gohan and Piccolo, and Yamcha's anime feats against Pikkon tier opponents all indicate a staggering leap in strength and speed, well into the realms of faster than light, star level, or even universal magnitudes. In essence, the human trio represent the ultimate underdog evolution, beings who began as mere martial artists on a backwater planet and through sheer will and adaptability ascended to standings amongst godhood. All three of them would easily beat Frieza, without even trying at this point in the series, and even before the end of Dragon Ball Z, depending on the scaling, making this matchup not even close.